Hey, everyone. Welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter, joined by Ray Fittipaldo here. We're going to talk about what we got from Steelers GM Omar Khan as he was talking to us privately before he hit the podium to the talking to us in the Pittsburgh media. We'll discuss things he said, read through the tea leaves, see what we can actually determine from what he's been talking about, all here on the North Shore Drive podcast as we get ready for the Combine to start. Let's get into it. You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter. Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter, joined today by Ray Fittipaldo, one of our great Steelers beat writers. And as always, you can find the show in your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed, subscribe to this channel to get all of our Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive podcast, as well as the daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, including our daily update that we will be giving you from the Combine. If you wanted to get our instant reaction to things that Omar Khan said, both Jerry Dulac and Ray Fittipaldo talked about that already, so be sure to check that out on the appropriate channel. And as always, the show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. Whether you're injured in an accident or hurt on the job, Edgar Snyder Associates has helped injured victims for over 40 years, recover more than $2 billion on their behalf. If you or a loved one have been seriously injured in an accident, call 1-800-94-EDGAR or visit www.edgarsnyder.com for a free consultation. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. Ray, we got to talk about Omar Khan. I want to let a clip play here of what he was saying here because he did open up about quarterbacks. We asked a lot about quarterbacks. Of course, the Steelers, the only quarterback they have technically signed to their roster is Skylar Thompson. Everyone basically knows that guy's, if anything, is a third stringer, if not a practice squatter that's there. Let's play what Omar Khan said, and I want to get your reaction just breaking down what you can actually decipher from what the Steelers GM said.
I know you guys are going to ask about the quarterback situation. I'll tell you guys as much as I can. The reality is last year we went into this understanding that we had three quarterbacks in the last year of their deal. Here we are until we get one of those guys or two of those guys or some combination of them signed up. All options are on the table. Had conversations with both Russ's people and Justin's representatives. And, with that, we'll see where it goes and, open up to any questions.
Omar, where does it stand? I mean, are you kind of going to feel it out and see what each one decides? Have you decided maybe which one you would like to lean toward? Where does that stand?
I think ideally, like to sign one of the guys that we had last year. But the reality is they're both free agents. So until we get one of those guys under contract, all options are on the table.
Was the feedback from them that they're as interested in a return as you guys?
I believe they're interested in coming back.
In your mind, is it one or the other? Is there a scenario where both end up back in Pittsburgh?
The way I look at it, it was a positive experience with all three of those quarterbacks. I don't know how realistic it is that all three will be back. But if there's an opportunity for there to be a combination of, a couple of those guys to be back, we'll be happy with that.
Might you consider looking outside? Might you consider outside?
Jerry, until we have someone under contract, all options have to be on the table.
So all options are on the table, Ray. What do you determine from any of that? Or is this just a whole bunch of just, hey, I'm Omar Khan and you will learn nothing from this press conference?
Well, what do the Steelers always say, whether it's Art, Mike, or Omar, free agency is free for them and it's free for us. So they have no one, like you said, other than Skylar under contract at the moment. And, they're going to play the field. I believe him when he says their preference is to have either Russell Wilson or Justin Fields be that bridge quarterback. And I think, eventually they'll talk to us about, getting a franchise quarterback through the draft. Probably not this year because we know this class is relatively, weak when you compare it to other quarterback classes. So, I do think it's probably going to be Justin Fields or Russell Wilson. But like Omar said, until one of those guys signs, they have to keep all their options open.
I think that's the thing here is that the Steelers are playing the field. Like this is what this is like when you don't have someone under contract. And I understand Steelers fans' frustration. We're like, come on, just pick somebody, because we'd like to know who it is as reporters, right? Like we like to be able to just move on from that stage of things. I did think it was interesting. He also said that, like, hey, ideally you'd like to have this done before free agency gets started, so that at least kind of gives you a semi clock here. But Ray, I think the bottom line is you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket, because right now, if Omar Khan comes out and says we prefer Justin Fields over Russell Wilson, then what happens if Justin Fields turns down and then you can't get Russell Wilson because now he knows that, and it creates that. So I think he's just trying to paint the picture of, like, hey, we're happy with a lot of different directions, but we're not telling you where we're going.
Yeah, and listen, let's be honest. There is an economic aspect of this whole thing. The free agent market, the agents are here, owners and GMs are here. They're talking. People talk about the legal tampering period in free agency, but in reality, they're all talking numbers this week, Chris. And I think the first domino that has to fall, it's not even for a free agent. We have to find out what kind of market Matthew Stafford has. And there was a report this week, and Jerry touched on it in his story that Stafford's reps are talking to other teams to gauge the trade market and, most importantly, his value. And I don't think Russell Wilson or Justin Fields is going to sign with the Steelers until Matthew Stafford, because he's the top quarterback during this trade free agency period. Until he signs, until we know what that number is, all these other guys aren't going to be able to be slotted in, right? So right now, Matthew Stafford is on the books with the Rams for $27 million a year in 2024. He's not going to play for that number. So whether that number is 35, 40, does he go back to the Rams? Does he go to the Giants for something else? Until that number is defined, we're not going to know what Russell Wilson wants. We're not going to know what Justin Fields wants. So I think we're all just kind of a captive audience here. We got to figure out what Matthew Stafford's move is. And then when that move is made, I think you might actually see things transpire pretty quickly with the Steelers quarterback situation.
That's a very good point on your part with talking about setting the market. And oftentimes it's the best player that sets the market. Like, for example, a lot of people for a while were wondering what's going to happen with T. Higgins in free agency. Then when the Bengals, a report came out that they're going to franchise tag him, that takes him out of the consideration. And then you're like, okay, now there's a different kind of market that's set there. But that makes a ton of sense with Matt Stafford, especially because the Rams need to figure out what they're doing with him, if they're going to pay him, if someone else is going to pay him, if someone's going to trade for him. And then, like you said, Russell Wilson, Justin Fields, their agents are going to act accordingly. And I think that's a good point by you, because now it points to that timeline where the Steelers have until basically when free agency opens, when the official league year starts and everyone can start making moves and going and getting guys. That's when it could get to the wild, wild west. But if you're the Steelers, you want your quarterback before then, because when you get to the wild, wild west, anything can happen. You can have your sights on so many different players and they can go wherever they want. So instead of letting it get there, I think this is, again, why they kind of want to prioritize Justin Fields or Russell Wilson, so they can make sure they get one of their guys.
Yeah, the worst case scenario for the Steelers is this Stafford thing doesn't have a resolution this week. And as long as the Stafford situation drags on, I don't really see the Steelers having any clarity in their situation. And like you said, Chris, that would be bad going into free agency. Then other teams would have a shot. You want this negotiation period with Fields and Wilson when they're a captive audience, when you can only talk to them. So I think you're right. Like I said, I think Stafford's the first domino to fall. We'll see if it happens this week. If it doesn't, things are going to get interesting next week when everyone gets back to their home cities.
Well, I want to talk about other things that Omar Khan said. We asked him specifically about George Pickens. I want to discuss that and your question about the wide receiver position, Ray. We'll get to that next year on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. But first, I want to remind you the show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. If you're injured in an accident, you're probably wondering what's next. Well, for over 40 years, Edgar Snyder Associates has helped injured victims answer that very question. Whether it's gathering evidence, collecting medical records, or dealing with insurance companies, Edgar Snyder Associates has helped over 75,000 people handle the what's next question. Call 1-800-94-EDGAR or visit www.edgarsnyder.com for a free consultation. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. We're back here on the North Shore Drive podcast for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. We're here in Indianapolis where we're covering the NFL Combine. Omar Khan, Steelers GM, spoke yesterday on Tuesday, and we got to ask him several different questions. One of the questions we asked was about the wide receiver position, specifically what's the future and what's the plans or what's the outlook for George Pickens with the Steelers. This is what Omar Khan said.
Speaking of receivers, George Pickens is entering the last year of his rookie deal, and typically when you guys have a guy like that, they've done a hold in or something happened there. What's the outlook on you guys' plans for him moving forward with the team?
Sure. I had a really solid exit meeting with GP, and I can tell you that he has a desire to be great. He has a desire to be great here. We have a desire for him to be great and to be great here. We'll see, with respect to the contract, we won't discuss that publicly, and usually those things are addressed at a later date.
So, Ray, you and I have talked a great deal about George Pickens and the future here. You and Jerry have talked about it. You find it hard for them to see a future with him. Is that just GM speak to be like, yeah, we think that George is part of the future because they're trying to find a trade partner for him? If you talk him down, it lowers his trade value. Or do you think there's actually some truth to that? The Steelers and Omar Khan feel like he could be the guy for them.
Yeah, Omar and the Steelers certainly don't want to tip their hand and let other teams know that he's on the trade market and they don't want to deal with his antics anymore. So, he definitely has to toe the line there. And, I don't know exactly how Omar and the Steelers, feel about George, but they do have to keep their options open. And like I said, they don't want to, have these teams think they have to dump him. So, that's one aspect of it. I wrote about it today. They got three options. They can trade him, they can keep him for the year, and or they can extend them. And I don't think extending is an option whatsoever. I give that about a 1% chance. I do think the most likely scenario is keeping him for 1 year. And then, Chris, we talk about trades, and when are the popular times for trades? You could do it
Trade
next
deadline.
month. It's the new league year. You could do it draft day, which the Steelers have done. They've done both those scenarios, March and April. Or they could do the trade deadline. And if you're going to keep him, you could see how he behaves. You can see where you are in the standings. And then you could pull that trigger, around Halloween, whenever the trade deadline falls. I think it's late October, early November now on the NFL calendar. You could keep him, but you could still trade him, later in the fall. So I'm not closing the door on a trade possibility next month, certainly not on draft day. But if you were to sit here and ask me right now, the most likely scenario, I would probably say keep him and then, see what happens. And then you could always deal him at the deadline and see if you can get some return for them at that point.
Well, I mean, let's be real about this too. This is not new territory for Omar Khan. I thought one of the biggest moves he made to start off his tenure with the Steelers was trading away Chase Claypool and getting a second-round pick, not just a second-round pick. It turned out to be the first pick of the second round. And I feel like if you got that kind of return for Chase Claypool, man, maybe you should be calling up Chicago and seeing if they can give up 2 first-rounders for George Pickens. But Ray, what do you say to those people that are very much against this, that think that this is a ridiculous move, that George Pickens is the top playmaker on this offense, and if you give him away, now you're starting with basically nothing in your receiver room as far as a star playmaker?
Well, I wouldn't give him away. I mean, I don't know that I would take anything less than a second-round pick for him. I think, a third-round pick. I mean, I think second round would be ideal. You're not going to get a first for him. Let's face it. He's going into the last year of his deal, but
right, that's a rental.
Yeah, I mean, Chris, I'm not giving him away for a 4th-round pick or a 5th-round pick.
Well, I guess let me rephrase. Not just give him away, but make him not part of the Steelers' future. Because there's some people. Because you and I, we see around the locker room, right? We see some of the temperaments that go on. But I think to the outside eyes, they see the playmaking, they see they see his bravado, they see how confident he is as a playmaker, and they see that there's not many other guys that are of his athletic caliber on the offensive side of the ball. So I understand why Steelers fans are like, wait, why are you trying to get rid of that guy? Yeah. But explain to our viewers and listeners why that is. Why they move on at all.
Yeah, listen, they would do it because they just wouldn't want to deal with the on and off field stuff that's been lingering for not just this past season, Chris, but going back to his rookie year. And listen, when they drafted him, this was Kevin Colbert's last draft. They knew, people in that building knew that he was going to be a project professionally, getting him to grow up, so to speak, just to put it in layman's terms. And they've tried for 3 years now and it hasn't worked. So people say, well, what are you going to do? You have no talent. Well, listen, when you look at the numbers, Chris, he only had 900 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns. It's not like you're replacing Antonio Brown in his prime when he's 1,800 yards and 12 touchdowns, or whatever his numbers were from year to year. And we talk about it all the time. And sometimes there's just addition by subtraction. And if you would make that call to move on from him in March, replenish through free agency, replenish through the draft, and rebuild that room as best you can, probably understanding it's not going to be rebuilt in one offseason, but start the process now. And maybe if you have a more cohesive locker room or a more cohesive offense without George, in the end, honestly, that just might be better than having him on your roster. That would be the explanation that I would try to give to our listeners out there.
Look, addition by subtraction is definitely moves that the Steelers have done in the past. Chase Claypool looked very promising in his rookie season with the numbers that he put up with Ben Roethlisberger, but then he wasn't producing, and then there were questions about his character, and so then he was sent away, and again netted a second-round pick. You talked about Antonio Brown; they traded away Antonio Brown, and they got back what was a third and a fifth, I believe it was, and those were the picks they used to trade up to go get Devin Bush. Now Devin Bush didn't work out, but the idea was to use those picks to help them go and get a linebacker, which was a key position that they needed at that point in time. You can go back even further. You go back to Santonio Holmes. Now, that guy they did kind of give away for a low-round pick, but one of those low-round picks turned into the ability to go get Emmanuel Sanders and Antonio Brown in the same draft without compromising what they were doing. So the Steelers have been in this territory before, not just with Omar Khan, but historically. I do think that, if they feel like it, like George Pickens is not the guy they want to sign long-term, and that's what both you and Jerry have made that very clear, then it does make sense that, you know what? Let's just say the right things right now. Let's keep him feeling comfortable. And then when the time comes, when someone calls and the Packers, they want a star receiver for Jordan Love, and they're willing to cop up that second-round pick, then all of a sudden you got 2 second-round picks. And then you and I, we're going to be over this next week. We're going to be looking over all these guys at the combine and all the guys that are impressing there. And you're going to say they can only get a first-round, second-round caliber DT and wide receiver. And how do they get it? Now they can add another pick to that mix there, and so they're not pressed for just needing to solidify themselves with 2 positions there, or if they wanted to double up with 2 positions of caliber, say they drafted Matthew Golden, the receiver out of Texas, in the first round, and then in the second round they got their DT, but then they wanted to go get Jaden Higgins out of Iowa State. Then all of a sudden you have your vet that you probably signed in free agency, and then 2 rookies, if that's what you got for George Pickens.
Yeah, listen, this is a good depth draft. There's talk about, a lot of the top prospects really, once you get past 15 or 18 or 20 in this draft, there's not a lot of difference between 20 and 60. So, acquiring extra picks in the second or third round, if that's what they would be able to get for a George Pickens, or, even let's say they get a second and a fourth, this is a good draft just to kind of accumulate picks in the second, third, fourth round, because that's a good way just to, improve your overall roster. So, the main takeaway from Omar today in terms of the receivers, no matter what happens with George, and he wasn't tipping his hand one way or the other, he did acknowledge, and I think he realized after not landing Ayuk last summer, I think he is going to be on the prowl this March, this April, to make sure, hey, if these trade talks linger into the summer, I don't care. I got a good free agent starter, and I got a good first, second, third round draft pick who could also potentially help my receivers room. I think that's the way he's going to approach it. That's probably my biggest takeaway from his talk today, in dealing with the receiver aspect of it.
we got to look at a couple other things he talked about, particularly about roster construction, because he did address how the Steelers continue to have the highest paid defensive side of the ball roster in the NFL and the impact of that. I want to talk about that next here with Ray Fittipaldo here on the North Shore Drive podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. But first, remind you, this show is also brought to you by Savinas, Kane, and Gallucci. They're your mesothelioma and asbestos lawyers with over 85 years of experience. Call them today for a free consultation. That's Savinas, Kane, and Gallucci. We're also brought to you by Moon Township Honda, where you can go to your new Honda vehicle at 5802 University Boulevard in Moon Township, PA, or visit their website at moonhonda.com. Here's our message from our friends at Moon Township Honda.
We gave the all-electric Prologue EX class-leading passenger space. And we made its tech intuitive with Google built-in. Perhaps that's why we were named Best Overall EV and Hybrid Brand by Kelley Blue Book. It's nice when a dream comes together. Buy online, reserve from select dealers, or visit your local Honda dealer today.
Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, let's continue talking about here. We asked Omar Khan about the construction of the Steelers roster, offense versus defense, the investments, and how that plays into things. I want to get into his answers here because I thought this is another. I felt like he's trying to not direct things too directly about what the Steelers' plans are, but he does acknowledge how the Steelers have been paying for defense, and they haven't gotten the results they've wanted, especially in the postseason. But here was Omar Khan.
Omar, you guys are set to have the highest paid defense for the fourth consecutive year. Are you satisfied with the return on investment that you're getting for all of that money you're spending on that type of ball?
We didn't win a playoff game this year, so definitely not satisfied on where we're at.
Piggybacking on the structure of the roster, about defense being the highest paid in the league, does that inform you all's decisions as far as how you want to keep building this roster moving forward, spending for offense versus defense?
Look, at the end of the day, the goal is to acquire as many good players at every position group, and that's the approach we take, and that's going to continue. The balance. I'd like to say it's 50-50. That's the reality is. It's just based on how your roster is constructed. That's not necessarily going to be the case.
Ray, this is something that I think has been blown out of proportion in Pittsburgh because people want to be mad about the defense getting all this money and they want a new offense and all these things. But the bottom line is that, like Omar Khan's kind of referencing there is the veterans and the talent on defense are there. You want to pay TJ Watt. You want to pay Minka Fitzpatrick and Cam Hayward and those guys because they're performing at a high level. When the talent was on the offensive side of the ball, that's what they paid for. When Ben Roethlisberger, Le'Veon Bell, Antonio Brown, Marquise Pouncey, David Castro, they were one of the more expensive offenses in the NFL for during that era. You pay the side where you have the superstar veterans commanding your roster, but you also look at the offensive side of the ball. Especially this past year, they were mostly on rookie deals, whether it was Najee Harris or Dan Moore or Broderick Jones or Zach Frazier or Mason McCormick or George Pickens or Calvin Austin. All these guys, your highest paid offensive guys were what? James Daniels and Isaac Seumalo. Even Justin Fields was still technically on a rookie deal, and Russell Wilson was on the super cheap deal because of his thing with the Broncos. So I think Omar Khan's point is this is something natural that's going on. It's not something that they're strategically trying to do because that's just how they feel like the philosophy has to be, but it's the reality of where they are.
Well, I mean, the bottom line is just simplify it this way. They've drafted much better on defense than they have on offense, both under Kevin Colbert and so far, under Omar Khan. That's the bottom line. You mentioned all those guys. Cam Hayward, still on the roster. He was drafted 2011. Great pick. Tremendous pick. Guy probably going to be a future Hall of Famer. You don't draft Minka, but you develop Minka. He's been here for all but 1 year of his career. TJ Watt. Omar said today, a legacy guy. We want to see that guy retire a Steeler. So get ready.
Alex Highsmith.
Alex Highsmith. So get ready for TJ. Get ready for another, 28, 30 million, whatever that number is going to be. And then when you flip it over, you look at the offense. Kevin Colbert's last draft, Kenny Pickett's already gone. They don't have to pay that first-round quarterback, right?
Right.
Najee Harris, probably going to be gone. Their first-round pick, probably not going to pay him on a second contract. So it's just worked out that way. Is it fortunate? Is it unfortunate? I don't know. I mean, people wouldn't be complaining about this defense if, they were still winning games by giving up just field goals, right? I mean, that's, things deteriorated late in the season. They stunk on defense and offense. Everyone's upset about it, but I'm with you. As long as you are drafting and developing and keeping your best players, it doesn't really matter if it's on offense or defense. The stress and the goal for Omar Khan going forward is let's start drafting better on offense because that's what they have to do.
That's what I think this is the bottom line is that they need to hit on their guys. Let's also be real, too. We haven't seen some of, Omar Khan's been around for 2 years, right? We haven't seen the chance for these offensive players to develop. It took Cam Hayward, years before he became the force that he was. He was always that young guy who was contributing early, but I think it wasn't until 2013, 14, 15 was when people were like, oh, wait, that guy is a pretty good first-round pick. And then it wasn't until 2017, I'd say that the whole NFL was like, no, he's a first-team all-pro type of guy. And so it took time for him to get there. And I think when you look at how the Steelers are constructed right now, you don't know how good Zach Frazier is going to be. You think he's pretty good. You don't know how good Broderick Jones is going to be. We still have not seen Troy Fautanu or Roman Wilson, 2 key offensive picks from this last draft class. And Omar Khan's only been around for 2 seasons. Right. So I think that's part of the equation here is just that, look, when people harp on the whole they think they're giving this really hot take because the Steelers are spending too much on the defensive side of the ball. Look, yeah, but it's because that's where the talent is right now. And also, it's kind of where if you go back to that era we were talking about when they had one of the more expensive offenses, guess what they were drafting during those years? Ryan Shazier and Stephon Tuitt in 2014, Bud Dupree in 2015, Ari Burns in 2016, TJ Watt in 2017. They were just defense because they knew they had to load up on defense to create the nucleus that they now have and put that together so that they could win that way because they knew eventually the offense was going to age out. And now they're on the flip side of that where the defense still has a bit of prime left, right? But it's taking them time to figure out the offense while they're like that. And I think that's the real challenge the Steelers front office is facing right now is trying to make that offensive side of the ball happen while the defense is still intact as a really good unit.
Yeah, and it's predicted to be the highest paid defense again. But what happens if they cut Larry Ogunjobi? What happens if they cut Cole Holcomb?
Yeah.
Now, listen, they could reinvest in the defense and go get yourself a stud defensive tackle. I mean, that very well could happen. But, we're kind of projecting out and trying, the salary cap number for the Steelers isn't going to be set till August or September once you know what your final 53-man roster is. So, right now we're in February. We're trying to figure out all the world's problems, the Steelers' problems. And, I think in the end, this free agency class, you're probably going to spend equally on offense and defense. I think you need a starting defensive tackle to replace Ogunjobi. You definitely need a starting receiver or a capable receiver who's going to step in and be a guy in that rotation. So in the end, they're probably going to spend equally. Last year it was all Patrick Queen and Deshaun Elliott mostly on defense. I think this year it's probably going to be split evenly between both units if I had to predict that way.
Absolutely. The players start talking today. So you stay tuned with all of our reporting for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette on the Combine, whether that's Pitt players that you're interested in. Ben Sauls talks today on Wednesday. We'll also hear from Gavin Bartholomew, Kanate Mumfield, and Brazen Taylor all throughout the week. But then also all the Steelers targets, defensive linemen, receivers, corners, quarterbacks, all those players we'll be talking to while we're here at the Combine, getting you the close insight as far as how those players look heading into this part of the draft process. From Chris Carter and Ray Fittipaldo, thanks again for tuning into the North Shore Drive podcast. Remember to tune into this show every Monday, Wednesday, Friday on your favorite podcasting apps or on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this channel to get all of those Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes. Back here Friday with a wrap-up of what's going on at the Combine here for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette on the North Shore Drive podcast. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all the sports coverage from the Post-Gazette that we have to offer, visit post-gazette.com.